Hey guys, it's post-lunch, it's the lull, the tummies are full, everybody's happy, the eyes start to glaze over. But this is not something that I'm just passionate about, but I think if we're honest, like we all are feeling the tension of our teams this year, and we talked a little bit in our June Churchfront Live event, and it was pretty crucial and pretty obvious that a lot of our people in our kind of sphere, tech and worship leadership, were feeling, the majority of last year. Like among, your home groups adjusted well, maybe your events slowed down, your pastor still prepped a sermon and you probably recorded it and put it into Final Cut or iMovie or Adobe and edited it and became a full-time multimedia post-production engineer at that point. So we're all feeling this kind of tension and this lack of our ability to have these volunteers. And what I mean by that is I think that a lot of people are coming out of this season and they're seeing their team withdraw because they wrung themselves out so much during the COVID season. So we're seeing that. So I have a couple team members that said, man, I've been just draining myself, serving every week, and then there's sickness involved. So it's all these things that are a part of this equation. So I really want to challenge us to think intentionally about those next steps with your volunteer teams. So we all have them. We all love them. Volunteers are what enable us to produce services, produce environments for the worship gathering to happen, for people to hear the good news of the gospel. So we'd just love to share some of my thoughts here. Like Jake said, I've been leading worship for over a decade at this point, and really stepped into that at the age of 14. Worship pastors saw me lead at a See You at the Pole event. If you grew up with like the prayer things, and so I was playing acoustic guitar at a See You at the Pole event, and he walked over and said, hey, would you come and lead worship for our youth group? We've been using YouTube videos, and so I led there. That worship pastor at that church said, hey, I think you should consider doing this like as a career. You should go to school for this. You should take some lessons. Like, I think you've got some natural kind of gifting. So that really spurred my life as a worship leader, trying to lead worship wherever I could. So lots of yeses to Bible studies and prayer gatherings and, leading for free in college at some places, but was able to intern on staff. I went to CCU, which is Colorado Christian University, which I think is that way quite a bit in Lakewood, Colorado. So studied worship arts, got a bachelor's in worship arts there, and so I got really a music degree with a little bit of pastoral biblical theology emphasis on the side, helping me critically think about worship ministry, helping me think about, pastoral theology, those kind of things. And I got really passionate about that. And it was such a great environment. So I was able to intern at a church named Waterstone, which is that way towards the mountains. And great church in Littleton, was able to intern there for a while and just love leading worship. So part of talking to you guys, talking to worship leaders all over the world is just really fun for me because I love this environment. And so we spent some time in Austin, like Jake mentioned. We actually moved there right before the pandemic happened and kind of essentially quarantined in our house for those 18 months or whatever it was. My wife was a kids director on staff at Austin Stone Community Church. So we got to kind of be a part of that church community during that season, served as one of their their tech volunteers during that season, which was really fun. I learned a ton in that environment. And like Jake said, now I'm at Storyline Church. I serve as the production and technology manager at that church up in Arvada. It's probably about 45-ish minutes north from here. And I oversee all AVL, just integration of gear, lighting, audiovisual lighting, and then I oversee all of our worship environments. So our worship center for main services on Sunday, and then our student worship center and our kids worship center as well. So all the gear, all the training, all the volunteers that go into those environments is what I'm in charge of. So really, really cool opportunity, a place to be. God's doing some really cool things. Shared a little bit yesterday at Storyline, so it's really a privilege to be a part of that. So I wanted to kind of route us or ground us before we dig too deep. If you have a phone or a Bible with you, would you do me a a favor and just open up your Bible to 1 Corinthians chapter 3. And we're just going to read a passage of Scripture together. And this is 1 Corinthians 3, verses 5 through 9. And this is, you might have heard this before. Again, I'm not exegeting this text right now, but I want to give you some background for where kind of my thoughts are coming from as I have thought about my team, have thought about your teams, have coached a lot of folks in worship ministry school, and just continue to be brought up to this. So 1 Corinthians 3, 5 through 9 says, "What then is Apollos? What is Paul? Servants through whom you believed as the Lord assigned to each. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. He who plants and he who waters are one, and each will receive his wages according to his labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building." So the first thing I really want to highlight here is we can't grow our teams by any sheer will of our own, right? We can use recruiting strategies, we can use tactics, we can use incentives to get people in the door and to join our team, but God ultimately has to do the work in people's hearts to give them a heart and a passion and a love for your local church and your ministry context to make them want to serve, make them want to contribute to the ministry, make them want to contribute to the life of the church. So one of my first steps I really want to encourage us to do is before we get too deep in the weeds of any kind of tactics or step-by-step instruction of building and leading a team is to pray for that end, right? We plant, we water, but God gives the growth, right? So people coming into your church, man, you can see that guy has maybe he's got some audio experience, or maybe he's served at another church, or maybe he's an engineer, or maybe she's got a real heart to serve and be on the media team, and whatever it might be that you see, we always want to jump and pounce and really, get after them because we need the volunteers. We've got a lot of roles that need to be filled week to week. But my challenge to you is to really, I found that as God has brought people to my team naturally, those end up being the best volunteers, the best members of my team, because I didn't go beg, borrow, and steal them at whatever cost is necessary. God worked in their heart by his Spirit to actually bring them to a place where he needed them, where he wanted them to be a part of the body of Christ in a really specific and unique way, right? So we were at this church plant. I forgot to mention that I also helped plant a church maybe 2 miles that way, called Fathom Church in downtown Littleton, Colorado. And so we started in the living room. We were just praying. We were singing some songs, again, saying yes to different environments to just lead worship. And that church, over the course of 5 years, grew to around 500 to 600 people. We started meeting downtown in Littleton, and in this small little business center, really, really scrappy setup, like an X32 with cables laying all over the floor, and just a really, nothing flashy about it, but God was growing this church. And we had multiple roles for our media team. This was all pre-COVID, so we weren't streaming at this point, but God brought at least 40 to 50 volunteers under my supervision in those 5 years, and again, nothing was cool about what we were doing. Like, anybody who had been in that building, had seen me lead, had seen what we were doing ministry-wise, nobody would say, man, Fathom's really got it going on. Like, they would walk in the doors and go, yeah, this is like a scrappy youth group setup kind of thing. Like, it just felt that kind of grungy. But I was overseeing our tech team of volunteers, our musicians, and I was the discipleship pastor, so I was also overseeing our home group volunteers. And again, I just go back to when you have the need for these roles, for these people to serve in these unique ways, I would just exhort you first and foremost, before you think about any other options, pray to the Lord that he provide people who are uniquely skilled or who have servant hearts, right? Like, before somebody comes in and says, hey, I want to run your front of house mix because I have all the experience in the world and I'm awesome. Like, Luke Hendrickson walks into my worship environment and says, I want to be the front of house guy. Like, I don't care if he's the best in the world. I want these people on my team to have the heart of Christ, where he says, I came not to be served, but to serve, right? I want somebody who comes in with that posture, that heart on my team. And so I want to pray to that end. Like, I believe to ask God that he'd provide people who are willing, who are servant-minded, who want to bless the church with their time and their gifts, that he will provide those people. Maybe not in my time or my expectations, but I do believe that he provides in that way. So one of the things for you guys as you lead, and I want to talk about two pieces to this: building the team and then leading the team. So real briefly, I want to talk about building real quick. As you build the team, you got to know your systems. I mean you need to know your systems well. So right now, we could probably all agree, we live in a day and age where there is really no excuse to not be able to learn something, right? I'll give you a couple of examples. Like when we were first-time home buyers, we bought this condo, and we were doing some bathroom renovations, and my wife was out of town, and I was going to try to flip the bathroom while she was gone, kind of thing. Just needed new floors, a new toilet, some new trim along the sides. Easy stuff, right? I'm putting back drywall that I had busted out or whatnot, and just was not paying attention and drilled drywall into what I thought was a stud, but it was actually our water pipe into that room. And so I drilled into it, left the room, went downstairs, got a drink, spent some time downstairs, come back up, and there's this hissing sound, and I'm just like, what is that? And so I'm walking around trying to find where it's coming from. I go into the bathroom that I had just done that in, and the drywall is soaked. And so I quickly grab my drill, I unscrew that piece of drywall, and water sprays, at full blast, out of that pipe everywhere. Just a little hole, but I had just tapped it enough that it, the water is coming at this point. I run down the basement, shut off the main water valve, and I'm soaked, my carpet is soaked, the drywall is, destroyed, obviously, and I'm super frustrated. And what that did to me is it created this anxiety about trying things and failing, and learning things and not having it all put together right away, right? And so my encouragement to you, and what I've had to get over even in this production role at Storyline and try to work through, is I need to be okay with taking steps and failing. I need to be okay with taking steps and trying things and having them not work perfectly. I need to be okay with not knowing everything. But what I would say to you guys as the leaders of your ministries is to not, what's not okay is if you refuse to learn, or if you refuse to give yourself the environment to learn, right? Because there is no excuse. If you go to your pastor and say, well, I just don't know enough about that, and there's no, but I'm going to do this to try, then I think you're not going to be able to build a team. Just to put it out there, I don't think you're gonna be able to build the team with that posture. So the Lord uses failure all the time. Read the Bible, the Lord uses failure a lot, and he uses flawed people. So you've got resources. I'm trying to figure out how to dim the brightness on our LED panels right now at Storyline, and I can't get our processor to connect with my computer. And so I'm on the phone with the manufacturer of the panels, right? We have a hardware switcher that was installed before I got there for our video streaming, and they offer 7-hour training sessions. Does that sound fun to anybody? No, but, it doesn't sound fun to me. Maybe it sounds fun to you. A 7-hour training session, I promise you, if I don't know a video switcher at the end of that 7-hour training session, there's something wrong with me, because that's a lot of time to be spending with something that's fairly simple to do what we need it to do in church ministry, right? There's just no excuse. If you want to learn Dante, we've made a course for Dante. You can go get Dante certified, which is borderline just you're becoming a network engineer at that point, and it's free. There's all these learning environments these days, YouTube, courses, talking to manufacturers where you can learn these systems. But you gotta know these: audio, visual, automation, broadcast, team development, pastoral clarity. There's a lot of systems that you need to kind of have a good grip on as you build your team. Not a perfect grip, but I do think you need to have some sort of an understanding of what it's going to take in your ministry context to actually build the team. Because you're talking about building. We're not talking about leading yet. We're talking about building. How do I get two people who I've never met before to come into our doors, and then the Lord works in their hearts, they want to join my team, and if I don't understand what I actually need from my volunteers, then I'm in a really tough space and it's not going to serve them well, not going to serve our church well. So learn your systems, find places to learn those systems. It really isn't hard these days to do a quick Google search, to do a quick, you can ask us at Churchfront. Like, we have learned a lot of things from the interwebs, so ask us where we learned some things, and I'm sure we have some good ideas there. And what I would say is pace yourself. Be okay with not being 100% learned yet. Like, there is space for God to work in that when you're humble and you say, I understand what I need to know kind of about our systems, but I promise you, I am not a ProPresenter expert, right? I have other things to do besides sit in front of ProPresenter all day and learn everything I can about ProPresenter, right? Same thing with graphics and LED wall and Photoshop, and there's all these temptations to go deep dive into them, but I want to build a team. So if I focus only on that one thing, I'm going to drop the ball over here on building a team because I'm so focused on getting that perfect Photoshop look on a graphic, right? So just, pace yourself. Be okay. Be humble as you learn. As you build the team, the second thing I would encourage you guys to do is to talk about it in your church. And by that, I mean nobody in your church should interact with you and not know that you have an open door to join your team, right? Nobody in your church should interact with you and think to themselves, I could never join their team because they only recruit specific types of people. I want everybody in my church to know that if they want to join my team, the answer, unless there's some flawed character issue there, is a yes. I'll find a role for you. If I don't have room in a role, I'll make up a new one. Because I guarantee I can place you somewhere, right? So talk about it with your people. Again, unless there's glaring character issues, you should be having conversations with people all the time about how excited you are to grow your team, how excited you are that God is building your team, how faithful your volunteers have been to this point, and how much you love serving with them. Talk about your team in a positive light with people who you encounter with in your church ministry. The next thing is having job descriptions. We talk about job descriptions ad nauseum in Churchfront and in worship ministry school because it has served our ministry so well. And I think if you don't have job descriptions for your ProPresenter operator, for your front of house engineer, for your broadcast engineer, for your video switcher, for your video director, for your producer, whatever you've got, they all need job descriptions. They can say really similar things, but if you don't have clarity on what the vision is behind what that person is doing, then you're not going to be able to recruit or build onto that. Okay, so if you just bring people in, sit them down at ProPresenter, and go, yeah, the arrow key is right here, okay? See you after service. Because that's what some of my volunteers had the experience of. The previous TD, tech director, walked in, upgraded to ProPresenter 7, and said, there you go, all you need to do is click next slide. And then he quit 5 months later. So they had no vision of why ProPresenter 7 was such a crucial, significant tool for them. They had no vision of what their role actually was contributing to on a Sunday morning. They literally showed up and thought they were an arrow key or a space bar pusher, right? And how belittling is that? How you wouldn't get excited about that, right? If somebody asked you to come sit in front of a keyboard for an hour and a half every Sunday and push the space bar, I need a little bit more than that, right? To get excited, to get amped up about being in that role. When you communicate, hey, you might just be pushing a space bar or an arrow key, but what you're doing is you're presenting truths of the gospel for people to put into their mouths and sing unto the Lord's glorification. That's that feels different for them when they hear that, right? And so if you don't have a job description that has that vision in writing, digitally or physically, get it. It's going to take you maybe an hour to make 5 job descriptions, to sit down on a Google document and just type out, here's why this position exists. Here's exactly the vision for this role. Here's how much time it's going to take on a Sunday or throughout the week. Do we expect you to come to rehearsals? Do we expect you to, dress a certain way? Do we expect you to know a certain kind of tool or tactic? You've got to know those clarifying pieces in order to build your team. Because if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, what do you need help with? What role could I serve in? And you go, I don't know. Let me think about that. The opportunity is gone. But if you have these 5 distinct roles and you know that 2 or 3 of them have some holes in them that you could fill, and you can say, hey, we're actually looking for some service producers right now. They're going to maintain the details that are involved in our services so that during each transition and during each piece of media that we show or song that we sing or sermon graphic that we show, that it's clean, it's checked, it's in order. You know, the service producer is really in charge of checking the broadcast mix during our private stream during the 9 o'clock. If you can communicate those details verbally and then on paper, you will start to grow your team quicker than you are able to handle, really, because clarity, I think, reels people in. Like, if you can communicate it well and cast vision into why it is important, you're going to be growing a team before you know it. So job descriptions aren't super complicated. Like, if you need a template, we've got one we can share with you. Get on a Google document, make it a PDF, put it on a website, whatever it takes. And then I would say 2 more things when you're building. Be involved in the life of your church in a non-leadership manner. I think either it was David or Luke that said this earlier, but it's like, or I think it was Aaron that said that you need to be involved in some other area of your church or leading in some other area of your church besides this one that is refreshing, is nourishing to you. And I would just 100% agree with that and say yes and amen. Like, go to events that you don't have to run and be a part of the church. You know, so often we as key volunteers or staff members, we just show up as our job. And so that can, our tank will drain if we just keep doing that. But if you have a ministry area that you're passionate about, that gives you life, that gives you nourishment to your heart and soul, like a home group, or maybe it's being a youth group leader for the young men in there or young women in there, like, go do that. Go serve your church in that way, free of the responsibilities of tech and production. I lead our students on Wednesday nights. Like, I'm leaving here at 5 and going to our student ministry that meets on Wednesday nights. And I don't have to be there, but I want to be there. And so sometimes I'll run front of house for them. Sometimes I'll run slides. Sometimes I'll run lights. Sometimes I just go and I just worship with 16-year-olds, right? And the young guys in there, like, the conversations we have give me so much life that it just reminds me of what the Lord is doing. Like, it reminds me and refreshes me as to what His Spirit is doing in our church. So that's a huge stepping stone, is to find that area of ministry that you can plug into that's free of your tech role, free of your requirements or your tech needs that you can show up to. You know, be a part of a prayer group, like on Wednesday mornings or something. Show up to your church and pray with people. Just some environment for you to really freely engage there. And then I would say network with churches in your area. You know, as you're building a team, nothing can be better than unifying yourself with other churches, because as you build a team and you resource other churches with, hey, if you need a guy to run front of house, I've got a couple extras, like we can, which nobody ever says, right? But if you build that network, then when you are in need of those hole fillers, it's a lot easier to do that in unity and not competition. And I promise you that it will keep you from bitterness if you're in unity with the churches in your area. So what I would hate to see happen as you're building your team and God is bringing people to you, let's say one of them leaves and goes to another church. Like, wouldn't you rather celebrate them and kind of send them well than be bitter and jaded that they're leaving you for somebody else and now you've got a hole to fill? Like, if you know the worship pastor or the tech director they're going to and you have good relationship and rapport with them, we can just celebrate. We can celebrate that we're in it for the gospel. We want to preach Christ crucified together, and we don't need to be bitter or jaded against one another in that process. So network with other churches in your area, because it can really prevent some of that unhealth that the enemy wants to seed into our ministries and into our hearts. And then never stop building your team. Let's say you show up tomorrow and God brings 25 brand new people that are all qualified, all highly trained, all skilled to serve in your tech department or serve on your musician team, right? And you're like, man, I don't have room. Like, I've already got a team of maybe 6 or 7 people, and so that would put me at 31, the rotation of a month and serving once a week. And like, you're just like, I don't have a spot for every single person. That's when you then start to build out your leadership pipeline, right? That's when you start to say, let's build a student band. Let's build a children's ministry band. Let's build a interim band that serves on the 5th Sunday of every month, right? Or whatever in those kind of odd weeks that months have. When you say to yourself, like, oh, I'm comfortable, I've got the volunteers I need, then you're not growing anything. You're not building anything. It breeds complacency, and then, you're really putting yourself into a tough spot for the future. But if you start to empower that second acoustic player that you've got, that you kind of don't really need, but he's helpful every once in a while, if you start to empower him to lead student ministry worship, and then one weekend it turns out that you get ill or you're out of town for vacation, how awesome would it be to just reach out and say, hey, do you want to lead worship on Sunday? You've been getting all the reps in student ministry, or you've been getting all the reps in kids ministry. Like, to have that pipeline is what sees churches through seasons of growth and the waves of growth and decay. Like, you having a leadership pipeline is really important. So as God keeps bringing people, start to think, okay, how can I backfill? How can I backfill into other ministry areas? One of my areas is events. Like, we run a lot of events at Storyline. We had a trunk or treat on Saturday. We set up a live PA with a live band out in our parking lot. It was really fun. But I thought to myself in that moment, my whole family's over there. I've got 2 little kids, and they're trunk or treating, and I'm over here running live sound. Like, I want to be with my 3.5-year-old who's dressed up as Jessie from Toy Story and like living her best life, right? I want to be over there with her, but I'm over here running live sound. And so what would happen if next time I had a sound engineer, if part of what I communicated to him was, hey, I'd love for you to be able to, once a month run one of our events, run sound for those. And that's kind of my expectation for our front of house engineers, is that you would serve the church not only on a Sunday, but then in addition, maybe be available for a live event. Or maybe we have a live events team that only does those live events but doesn't serve on a Sunday. Like, to have that bigger picture, to just kind of think, what if, where could I do this, I think will be really helpful for you guys. And I just would encourage you, don't stop building. When you feel like you have enough, keep going. Keep pushing. Keep thinking, where can I build another team? Where can I build another team? Where can I build another team? Keep asking the Lord those questions. And then really quickly, guys, this is the part of leading a team. I've only got 8 minutes left, but I think we'll fit this in here because it's not rocket science. If you guys don't have the book, The Shepherd Leader by Timothy Whitmer, I would really encourage you to pick that up. It's called The Shepherd Leader by Timothy Whitmer. This book is really written towards elders in a church. It's really written towards how to elder or serve on an elder board. But for me, it was one of the most pivotal books that I had ever picked up in terms of leading my team, because it distilled it down. I'm going to give you kind of the Cliff Note summary here. In order to lead a team or to shepherd a team, to pastor a team, you need to do 3 things. You need to know your team, you need to feed your team, and you need to lead your team. He uses the analogy of a shepherd, so he talks about sheep a lot. And he talks about knowing the sheep specifically. That's knowing their names, knowing their spouses' names, knowing their little sheep children's names, right? You want to know where those sheep go to school. You want to know when their birthdays are. You want to know your sheep deeply. You want to know exactly what kind of like Enneagram number your sheep is, right? You want to know what Myers-Briggs assessment your sheep is. Like, knowing your sheep, being able to pick up the phone and call your sheep in your team. Like, this is a really important step that I think a lot of us don't prioritize on Sunday mornings because we're too busy doing all the moving pieces. But during the week, let's pick up the phone. Let's call them. Let's ask them how their day was. Let's ask them how their marriage is. Like, if you develop those kind of relationships, you should know the deepness of their family rhythms, of their dynamic, of their hearts. And it's not that hard to ask those questions. Most people are waiting to be asked those questions. So let's know our sheep well. Next is feeding our sheep. Once you know, like Zach Hicks was at lunch talking about his son who's all into getting jacked right now. He's into like drinking, 15,000 calorie protein shakes and getting massive gains and impressing girls, right? So like that's a funny thing, but like Zach knows those inward parts of his son, right? He knows that that's what he's trying to do. He knows he's getting all jazzed about it. And so once we know our sheep, once we know our team, once I know that, my buddy Chris, who's a bass player on my team, his son just switched schools and he's in the middle of his 7th grade year. because he wasn't connecting at that first school. And in Colorado, you can switch schools whenever you want. You can go to whatever school you want. So kids kind of do that every so often. They'll hop from school to school. And once I know that about him, I can talk to Chris in a different way. I can feed him nourishment of stuff about being a parent, about having sons, having daughters, raising a family, discipling your family, giving him good things to read or listen to on a podcast or process in prayer. I can text him that I'm praying for him specifically about how he leads his son through this transition, right? As I know my sheep, as I know my team better and better, I can then feed them the nourishment that they need. It's like looking at a malnourished sheep and saying, stop eating the chaff because it's not nourishing you. Let's come over here to this green pasture full of nourishment, good green grass. Eat this, and you will become more well-nourished. Like, that's, if you think about the metaphor. You guys track with me with that metaphor? Like, we know what our people need, and then we can feed them the appropriate nourishment so they can continue to grow in the Lord, continue to, just continue to grow in their relationship with Jesus. As a leader, as a pastor, as a discipler, God is entrusting you with these people, and we have these moments where if we just expect them to push the buttons, we're missing that piece. So feed your sheep. Then once you've fed your sheep, the last step is to lead your sheep. I'll just kind of say this up front. We talk to a lot of worship leaders and tech directors all day, every day. And one of the things that we hear on these phone calls is, and on coaching calls is, hey, I love to leverage like a course. Like, man, my people have no idea how to do broadcast mixing, right? They'll come to us and they'll say, our online mix is just atrocious. Sounds terrible. Everybody sounds like they're in a tin can, whatever it might be. And we'll say, yeah, well, we've got a course for it. You can leverage that if you want. It'll kind of teach you the ins and outs of routing and signal chain processing, and probably be a really helpful resource for you guys moving from maybe an iPhone to mixing in a box, like Luke talks about. So we're having those conversations, and the response we get sometimes is, okay, well, let me go check with my team. And no offense to anybody who's been there and done that before. I've been there and done that before, but God has not entrusted you to be a people pleaser. God has entrusted you to lead your team because he put you in the role that you're in. He put you there. Why would you second guess it by going and trying to please 19 of your team members, right? There's a reason and there's validity to going and checking with leadership, right? To make sure that if you need to acquire gear or purchase some software, whatever it might be, submit to leadership. Be a good steward of your finances. But my team does not care if we upgrade to ProPresenter 7.7. They just don't. I don't need to check with them, right? I don't need to tell them, I don't need to have the conversation of Ableton versus Logic versus Pro Tools. Lead your team. Spend time, do the research, have conversations with other worship leaders, ask the right questions, and then take the step forward and lead. Okay? Like, there's not, and you might be wrong. You might fail. But I promise you'll waste more time trying to please everybody on your team, right? When I first took over this position at Storyline, I have this gal named Nita. She's a little bit of an older gal. She's got grown kids, but she has been faithfully serving on our graphics team for a long time, doing lyrics on Sunday. So she sits up in the broadcast booth room, dark. There's no, we turn off the light during service. She's kind of isolated from everybody else. She's not down in the congregation with people. Like, Nita is up in this like tower by herself. And when I came in, I served with Nita one week where I was up in the broadcast booth with her. And we just talked, we had conversation, and I told her some of the things that I was thinking about doing and just kind of sharing, what I'd like to do is I'd really like to get our lyrics team to be able to do, these 5 things really easily. And after that, she said, nobody in the role prior to me has spoken a vision forward before. Like, nobody had spoken a vision of what they wanted to do before. Everything was just troubleshooting, managing chaos, week to week. Nobody ever been forward thinking. Like, your team is waiting for you to be forward thinking. Your team is waiting for you to cast vision. Your team is waiting for you to take those steps. So take them. You might be wrong. It's okay. You might make mistakes. You might be flawed. That's okay. So lead out of that confidence. Last thing I want to say here as we wrap up. lead your team with grace and truth. And I know that that phrase is maybe kitschy or has lost maybe its sharpness in your heart at some level, but lead them with grace and lead them with truth. And the only way you're going to be able to do this is by doing what Jesus said, and that's to abide in him. So one more scripture as we wrap up here in our last minute. John 15, verse 4-8. Abide in me and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine. Neither can you unless you abide in me. I, Jesus, am the vine, and you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit, for apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered, thrown in the fire, and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. And by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. So I think that verse, man, if you're not spending time with Jesus on a daily basis, regularly seeking his will for your team, regularly seeking his will for the ministry at your church, regularly asking him what he has for your heart, what he wants to do in you, you're not going to be able to lead out of that grace and truth that God has equipped you to do. And so I would just encourage you, don't miss that. Don't miss that. God is the one who grows your team. God is the one who grows people and works in their heart by his Spirit. And you cannot do anything apart from the Lord. You cannot lead your team out of a place of weakness. You cannot lead your team because you are the best front of house engineer out there. You can't. Because you will be apart from the vine and you will wither and be thrown into the fire. So abide in Christ first and foremost as you go forward. Lead your team out of that confidence and that humility to Christ's will for your life. So let me wrap in prayer and we'll be done. God, thanks for these people in this room, and God, I pray that you would provide. I pray that as there are many ministries all over the world right now there are teams that feel the vacancy, the void of people to serve. There are people who are trying to do it all by themselves and grow extra limbs to accomplish these tasks. And God, I pray that you would humble us before you. Would we rest in your provision? You're a good father who loves to give to his children. And so I pray that we know that your ministry, your gospel will go forward. Let us not think too highly of ourselves that we have to be the providers of all these tools and strategies to accomplish your goal. God, we know you already have a plan, but I pray that you'd provide rest for the broken teams, for the weary teams who have been serving week in and week out, for the faithful men and women who haven't taken a week off of a Sunday and sat under your preached word and not had any extra responsibilities. I pray that you would give them rest. I pray that you'd give them weeks where they can be nourished by your Spirit. And then I pray that you'd provide laborers for the harvest for us, God. Bring people who don't know you through our church doors, and that you might work in their heart in a way that grows their love for the church and enables them to serve your church so the mission might go forward. I pray for the people who are currently serving that are weary and they're hanging on by a thread. God, would you provide them rest? Would you provide them rest? And by your Spirit, would you empower us to see that? For us to know our sheep well, for us to be able to speak nourishment in their lives, for us to send scriptures, for us to pray for them in person and over the phone, God, for us to love them well by maybe it's giving a gift of thankfulness, by writing a handwritten card or a note at their station, God. Help us to see those opportunities where your Spirit is opening up the door for us to speak in, to love our sheep well. I pray that you'd be glorified in all of it, God. It's not for our glory. It's not so that the technology or the preacher or the environments would be made much of, but it's to make much of you. And so I pray that you'd use us to that end, give us strength where we need it, help us where we are weak, and be glorified in our midst. We pray these things in your name. Amen. Thanks, guys.
We would love for you to join us at our next Churchfront Live gathering. Go to churchfrontlive.com to see our schedule of upcoming events and register today.